Hey yo, what is up mates? Just Rick here, bringing you a comprehensive guide on the Oculus. This guide is intended to make you knowledgeable enough to not make it painfully obvious to everyone that this is your first rodeo. In this guide, I'm going to be covering why you even farm the Oculus, what the cutline is for the gear, and of course, how to actually run the dungeon, which will include the strategies, all the boss attacks, and first awakening timings for you buffers. And I just want to give a heartfelt shout out to my guildies in Cygnus, who helped me record footage, and some of which claimed are the only reason they are even in this guild. But without further ado, let's go. First, let's talk about what the Oculus is even for, because despite being endgame content, I'm here to tell you that this is not the kind of thing that I suggest everyone rush to do. The primary purpose of this dungeon is to get what is called your Ditto Epic. Essentially, that is a free level 100 epic piece of your choosing that is not a weapon or of mythic grade. If you complete the dungeon the maximum of 2 times per week for rewards, you can finish the quest for the Ditto Epic in about 6 weeks. And you don't have to worry if at some point later down the line your Ditto Epic drops for you, you can always change your Ditto Epic at a rate of 1 time per Oculus clear after that. Now obviously, 1 epic does not make a man. That is, unless that 1 epic is the last one to complete your set, then it very well can. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is, Ditto Epics are mainly used only for finishing sets. So if you aren't close to doing that, then the Oculus probably shouldn't be a primary concern of yours for now. Aside from the Ditto Epic, however, the dungeon clearance also has a chance of dropping Oculus exclusive cards, the NPC Knight Roboto is selling level 100 epic pots, and Ezra himself has a relatively high chance of dropping 100 epics as well. Lastly, the Oculus is also a good source of Black Crystal, a resource required for upgrading your Super Tabers and Prey gear into some predetermined level 100 epic sets. This is an excellent option for characters that you aren't slave driving through the Guide of Wisdom, but still want to make stronger. Speaking about strength, however, let's talk about the Gear Cutline for this dungeon. At the time of making this video, this is the hardest content that the game has to offer. Because of that, the expectations for your gearing is high. It goes without saying that at this point in time, you had better have followed all of my tips in my gear expectations video, where I cover things like enchantments, creatures, auras, titles, reinforcement, everything. Go check that one out. It is still relevant here in 100 cap. Now, I'm here to tell you that a person in full 100 legendaries can absolutely do this dungeon. The problem is that the legendary set must be absolutely optimized. And even yet, if the whole party is in legendaries, you have to play perfectly and not fail any gimmicks. You'll still be struggling the whole time, but I think you'll just barely clear before the ritual is complete. It's no surprise then that despite this dungeon being scaled to that level of power, more is going to be expected than that to make runs proceed more smoothly. Personally, I say synergy should be somewhere around 30 to 40 billion 20-second sandbags, and deep should be about 40 plus. Though because nobody knows your sandbag times, it's often more easy to tell how strong someone is by how many epic sets that they're packing. I think if you have a 2-2 set and or an epic weapon, you should be able to reach these levels of power. Any more than that and you can start carrying this dungeon. For buffers, I'm just going to be straight with you. I've seen people take paper bags for buffers and still clear due to how strong people can get to overcompensate. But at the very least, please optimize your buffers accordingly by stacking your raw buff stat and optimizing your swaps. But hey, one thing that isn't about your gear but is still vastly important is that you have to be ready to go with your consumable items. You had better bring tons of Canna's food items and Sparkling Remy's touch into here because you will be taking a lot of incidental damage. You've got to bring an undiluted strength or int potion for damage. I'd bring some mind stimulation potions for cooldowns and Warlord Cry potion for burst, and finally, yes, there are some situations where the toy of the Sparkling World can come into play. Shortcut those as well if you don't already have Sparkling Remy's touch. But enough of this boring stuff, guys. Let's get into why you're probably here. How do we run this dungeon anyway? Now before we talk about the bosses in detail, let me just cover what the general strategy is first. The ultimate goal of this dungeon is to clear 3 randomly generated floors to be granted access to the final boss on the 4th floor. You'll need to defeat the final boss before the ritual here reaches 100%, a meter which goes down by 20% every time you defeat one of the first 2 floor bosses. Defeating the first 2 floor bosses also rewards you with a 25 and 45% damage buff respectively. Another way of putting this is, skipping these floor bosses will make you severely nerfed, among other things. Just don't do it. Each of the 3 floors is laid out in a 4x5 grid tile with randomly generated obstacles along the way. These obstacles can be the stairwell to the next floor, a mini-boss, or the floor boss. Until you defeat either of these 2 chaotic mini-bosses, you cannot see any obstacles until you are 1 room away from it, and thus if possible, it's always smartest to take the middle path of tiles to ensure that you get visibility on the most adjacent tiles that you can. Your first priority every floor is to try and eliminate all of the mini-bosses before tackling the floor boss. The primary reason for that is the buffs provided by these 2 so-called chaotic mini-bosses, which buff up all of the monsters on that floor tremendously, including the floor boss. Since there are 2 and they cannot spawn on the same floor, 2 out of the 3 floors will be supercharged by their effects. In fact, all mini-bosses spawn randomly throughout all 3 floors, but only do so once, so you'll need to be thorough in your exploration to ensure that you don't accidentally miss one. Yes, it is possible that you get a layout that doesn't have any mini-bosses on that floor because of this. After taking care of all of the mini-bosses, you'll want to kill what I call the floor boss, and there are 3 floor bosses: Lone Roseberry and Hellcat Louise, which can show up on the first 2 floors, and Soryun, who exclusively shows up in the 3rd. You'll really need to understand how these fights work if you don't want to look like a joker. Now after that, it's just you versus the final boss, Prophet Ezra. Now as a word of caution, be very careful with just using tokens willy-nilly. These 2 tokens are all that are available throughout the entire raid. They are not replenished even if you leave the dungeon, so please try and give your crusader some time to res you and only use a token if you know it's appropriate. Now there are some things that the raid or party leader should know about in particular. First off, this is the first time where the leader can opt to forfeit the entire raid at any time if it is clear that you cannot clear it. Gone are the days of simply waiting the timer out. You will be rewarded a second chance entry for the day, essentially meaning that you can try to clear as many times as you want per day, so long as you have the entrance fee of 30 FP per try. Seriously, Neopol, this feature needs to be extended to all existing raids right now. The party leader may also leave the dungeon at any point in time without penalty by hitting the insert key. The only things that will respawn are all of the trash mobs in between obstacles. Any bosses that you kill will remain defeated. You might already be able to imagine some uses for this, seeing as this is also a free cooldown reset. You can, for instance, use all of your awakenings to defeat a mini-boss and simply leave afterwards to get your cooldowns back. Since it also brings you to the start of the floor, this can also save some time on needlessly backtracking. If your team gets wiped from an attack, don't waste tokens, just retreat and go back in. Here's one exclusive trick to female crusaders and enchantress. After defeating the boss of the 3rd floor, reset the floor to get your awakening back. Cast your first awakening at the stairwell to the final boss, and when you load in, you will not only have your first awakening buff still active to get some quick bursts on the final boss to start the fight, but you'll also have your first awakening available to use again at any time. But anyway guys, that about covers all the strats that I got for you. Now all we've got left to talk about is the bosses themselves, starting with the mini bosses. Now I'm not going to really discuss the mini boss fights all that much. The reason for that is they really don't have much to them. They do have attacks and they absolutely can kill you, but they are extremely telegraphed and most likely you won't be fighting them for very long anyway. Don't forget again, if your team is struggling at these mini bosses, you can just blow all of your awakenings and re-enter. Here are basically what the mini bosses do when they are defeated. As you can see, as previously mentioned, these 2 chaotic mini bosses while they are alive will grant a huge buff to all of the mobs on the floor, including the floor boss, and thus I'd consider mandatory. Not to mention that defeating them will also clear up the fog of war, thus revealing obstacles on the minimap. The other 2 are more of safety nets, not providing you with any combat effectiveness, but can help save a run if you need more tokens or some potions from this homeless lady. Put some shoes on, will ya? Skip these mini bosses if and only if you and your team are confident in your abilities. One thing that Locke has constantly reminded me to add to the script is that there is one neat way to know whether or not a chaotic mini boss has spawned onto the floor, and it has to do with the trash mob's HP. Remember that the chaotic buff grants all mobs of the current floor 60% more HP, and thus if you notice their HP is higher than normal, you'll know that a chaotic mini boss has spawned. And lastly, if you save that pitiful homeless girl from the worm, she will be available on all subsequent floors after that. I personally only really get the health potion since it's an immediate heal with independent cooldown from all of your other potions, and I suppose this dust down here can also be purchased by the whole party if your ritual completion rate is getting dangerously high. Now on to the floor bosses. Unlike most bosses in DFO, these are not just fights where you wait until groggy and then kill them. This is a fight from beginning to end with hardly any groggy time at all. You need to constantly be doing damage to the bosses in order to defeat them. That being said, there are ample opportunities to get some big damage in on particular attacks and gimmicks, so it's important that you know all of them. As mentioned, Roseberry or the Hellcat Louise spawn on the first and second floors, so we'll start with Roseberry. Lone Roseberry is an Ezra, and he effectively has 4 different attacks that I want to cover. First is what I call squares. You'll notice across the sky that he will bisect the room with a white line. This line will then turn into a barrier, splitting the room horizontally. Do not stand on this line, as it will almost certainly turn into an instant death. An electric fence will spawn there, so you aren't allowed to move past it. After some time, he'll spawn squares of electricity, so move horizontally to find the empty spaces. He annoyingly still tries to swing at you during this attack, so try to avoid him as well while standing on the non-electrified squares. Second is the ice wave wall. He has 2 versions of this attack. Most of the time he shoots his ice wave, then shoots 2 waves to his left and right, which cover a huge area. You can simply stand on top of him and wail on this guy the whole time. Sometimes, however, he has the same starting animation, however unleashes a modified version, and instead a huge room-wide ice wave will shoot from a portal. You can avoid it by staying on the extremities of the room, or more easily simply use a Toy of the Sparkling World or Remy Sparkling Touch whenever you get frozen to safely move away from the explosion. His third attack is basically an explosion ring when he brings his hand together and charges up. Stand about here and wait for the first ring of explosions. The second that you see it, then run past them onto the boss. You will avoid the rest of the attack and get an opportunity to smack him. Lastly, you might notice that whenever this guy is held, the whole screen turns black and then these circles appear on the ground. The longer that you hold him, the more circles show up, effectively making this a hold deterrent move. If you hold this guy for too long, the whole screen will be full of circles and you won't be able to avoid the incoming damage when he unleashes the attack and the circles explode. Honestly, I don't find this move all that damaging, but at the same time, don't hold him forever or you might be spelling your doom. After some time, Roseberry will unleash his second awakening. This dragon will knock everyone back if you're standing in the circle, wasting precious damage time, so avoid it. This is when buffers should throw out their first awakening, and everyone burst as much as they can. If you're unable to take about 30% of this boss's HP during this attack, he will hit everyone with an unavoidable room-wide attack. He's also just standing there, so just wreck him. If you can't kill him here, I suspect you have done enough damage to at least avoid the attack, to which is just rinse and repeat for the rest of this fight. The next boss is Hellcat Louise, and I'm just gonna say it, she is straight up the hardest. I wish my brawler was this cool. Anyway, the reason she's dangerous is because just her normal basic attack strings will freaking hurt. She does these 2-hit stun combos and backflip kicks that will damn near one-shot you, but as long as you can keep your HP topped up with potions, I think you should be fine. At the start of this fight, I recommend that the buffer immediately activate their first awakening. However, everyone else wait until the groggy before you use yours because you don't want to miss. Now, there are 2 opportunities to hit this boss with a short groggy phase, and they can occur when the boss's HP reaches 90 and 40% HP respectively. At that time, the boss will drop a vial onto the ground. Once someone picks it up, it will be stuck on that person who now has to activate the groggy. You do this by waiting until the boss does a charging attack with a purple circle underneath her. Then the person with the vial needs to stand inside of this circle and press the tab key to inject the vial in at this time. Doing this will grant a short groggy, and in real time, this whole process happens pretty quick. The first awakening should still be active during this time, giving you a great chance to unleash your awakenings and rotations as necessary. Afterwards, it's merely a matter of whittling down her HP so that you can get to about 40% and groggy her again to get another rotation off, and then whittling her down until she's dead. Though this is a very tough fight if you aren't very geared to begin with. But let's talk about her attacks. First is her delayed venom mine. She fills the entire room with venom mines that have a delayed explosion. Basically, this is one of those attacks that has no gimmick. You just have to go stand on the correct spot or die. Those spots that I've found are at her 2 o'clock direction or her 5 o'clock direction. If you're anywhere close to the 3 o'clock direction, she will push you back into the mines and boom goes the dynamite. The explosion radius is deceptively large, and so so the safe spot is consequently very tight. The next attack, she pushes everyone back and drops some nets that explode. Run towards her to avoid it, but also be careful about just running to wail on her since she has a poison mist explosion on this attack, making it relatively safe for her to use. Sometimes throughout the fight, she will pick 2 members to trap in a poison bubble, leaving the remaining 2 members to free them by attacking this bubble. And lastly, she has this poison room-wide attack that once activated, she will focus projectiles at one person in the party, indicated by this large target. You can avoid it by simply moving around, however, other teammates can be caught in the crossfire, and if you're hit too many times, you're going to explode in a poison puddle. So just stay away from the guy who has a target on them while they're busy running around dodging. Also can't seem to avoid taking poison damage during this phase, so keep your HP topped up as well. And that's about it, guys. Learn her gimmick attacks, watch out for her vicious basic attacks, and for the love of Pete, pay attention if you have the vial. Use it on top of her whenever she's charging a purple circle. If you're gonna die in this dungeon, it's probably gonna be here most likely. Now the boss of the 3rd floor is always Soryun, and if you've defeated the first 2 bosses, you won't fight her crazy form. And trust me when I say, never stick your dungeon fighter in crazy. I won't be covering this encounter in this guide, but I hope to one day. In a way, personally, I find Soryun to be the easiest floor boss. She is quick and moves around a lot, making you often miss on some of your more powerful attacks. But that being said, none of her attacks actually hurt that much. If you maintain your HP, you can just straight up tank nearly all of them. The main one that you have to look out for is the full moon slash, indicated by one member of the team getting a mark over their head and a charging bar underneath indicating when the attack goes off. It's very simple. The person with the mark goes to one side of the boss, while the other 3 party members stay on the other. Those 3 party members are completely safe from the attack and can damage the boss with impunity. The only thing that the member with the mark has to do is jump into the air once that charge bar gets to full to avoid the slash. The leap buff can also be used to dodge this attack for those who are not confident in their jump timing game. This is one of those attacks that makes it clear whenever you don't know what you're doing, so just don't run around like a chicken when you see this mark. She has another attack that is a conical explosion that detonates twice, once after the initial explosion and once more from the skulls. If you stay behind her, you'll be fine. She has a charging slash attack whose range is reduced if you deal damage to her. Again, you can avoid this attack completely by getting out of range, but I just like damaging her and tanking it if need be. And lastly, she has a bunch of circles that she spawns, which if someone gets caught in it, is held for a guaranteed slash. Again, not a lot of damage here, so if you're a satyr or tank, I just get grabbed intentionally. But anyway, after a short time, she will initiate her gimmick attack, which is very easy to explain, but so many people do it wrong and thus fail the gimmick. First, a large meteor will target a random member of the team, the AoE of which is indicated. Once you hit her with this large meteor, she will be stunned, unable to move. Then a much faster small meteor will target yet another random player, and you need to drop this small meteor onto her to hit her with it. It will keep alternating between large and small, only giving you a few chances to get this done. If you do this 3 times, the gimmick phase ends and you get a small groggy, providing an opportunity for buffers to use their first awakening and everyone else to unleash their full rotation. Now the key to this gimmick is stay close to the boss. I'm talking only far enough to avoid the large meteor, because you only have a split second to get on top of the boss after it hits. If you fail the gimmick, the boss does a room-wide meteor storm. This is not a one-shot gimmick unless you're hit with too many meteors, so buffers can save this attack in many ways by using an AoE healing skill in the corner and keeping everyone's health topped up. Now personally, if I fail the gimmick once, I just say screw it, and as a buffer, just use my first awakening anyway. Like I've said many times now, these are not fights that have very long groggy states anyway, so just damage her at all times whenever you're confident that your attacks will hit. Now that we got the floor bosses out of the way, it's on to the big baddie, Prophet Ezra. Now if you followed my strat available to F-Satyr and Enchantress of using the first awakening in the previous floor, you should run up to Ezra and blow your entire rotation and awakenings on him ASAP. It will do a huge chunk of damage and set you up for having awakenings later if you need them. Otherwise, I'd wait until his gimmick attack and the short groggy to blow all of your awakening. Now this guy is just a series of about 6 different attacks. You should know all of them. First, he has a karate chop attack. He teleports to you and pulls you to him, and damn, he's been working out cause it hurts. I find that his most dangerous attack is the darkness explosion. He has a small explosion on top of him where if you get hit with it, you need to use a quick rebound immediately, because afterwards he does a winding X-shaped shadow explosion which does enormous damage. I think he's killed me with this move the most. He has an attack where he makes the whole room full of darkness and the only safe spot is the darkness circle around him. He tries to karate chop you the entire time, but in those brief instances, if you manage to counterattack him, you will create a short groggy opportunity. For his fire attacks, he has two. One is just large circles that expand, the range of which is deceptively large, so stay far away, and the other is a fire stomp attack. His conical stomp becomes the safe area after the initial hit, which will then turn the whole room ablaze afterwards. He has this attack where he raises his hands into the air and has these dark balls circling him. The idea here is that you have to damage him substantially to make him release some safe spots onto the ground. Then make sure that only one person is standing in a safe spot at a time, otherwise it will kick both of you off of it. The room will be full of explosions in a short time afterwards, so you've got to be quick and decisive about it. Some characters like Ninmaster and Knights can just straight up block the incoming damage and ignore it, and it's even possible to simply jump over it if you so choose. Lastly, he has his yellow channeling skill. Essentially, this is not dangerous at all unless you find yourself outside of the barrier that he puts up. Then you've got to avoid all of this light. But I consider this free damage on the boss. Get on top of him ASAP and just pummel him. His gimmick attack is the 4 channeling clones. You need to hit these clones outside of their circles, but the only time they are moved is when the necklace glows red. The timing is basically whenever the necklace is dimming, so you don't have to try and predict it or anything. Hitting it while it's purple will instead release a counterattack, so don't guess and react. There are tentacles all over the map in between the circles, so be careful whenever you're moving around during this attack. Jump to get to the other circles and don't step on a tentacle, they will straight wreck you. If your party is experiencing latency issues, then it kind of makes this gimmick nearly impossible to complete without complete guesswork. Though even if you fail it, it's not a guaranteed wipe so long as your health is topped up and you are spamming potions whenever it hits. But if you do manage to get all the clones off, then it puts the boss into a groggy state. Make notice that the tentacles don't always disappear immediately and thus can still pose a hazard if they're still around despite the boss being in groggy. If he's still alive or if you fail the gimmick, then buffers can actually use their awakenings at any time really throughout the fight, as long as everyone is on the same page and coordinating their skills whenever the buffer's first awakening is active. I personally like using it during his yellow attack. And with that, guys, I think we've covered just about everything you need to know about the Oculus. Yes, this guide is quite a bit longer than most of my guides, but I just wanted to ensure all of your questions were covered. It's about as comprehensive as most people need it. But for those of you guys who think this content is too easy, then I suggest trying to stick your dungeon fighter in crazy by skipping either Roseberry or Hellcat Louise. You'll get an alternate version of the Soryun fight that might quite literally carry you to hell.
Yo, let me go.
Don't know. Oh, shit, she got us. No. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. This is my submission for the Master of the Oculus Guide event, so I hope you guys like it, and I hope that it's been helpful. And I will catch you Knights later.